Besties, the way this situation keeps getting worse needs to be studied because the Resilient Jenkins housing situation is getting from bad to worse. It was already bad that they have been living in a motel for almost a year now, but it gets worse because the motel shelter they are in is soon set for demolition, and yet they still don't have a better housing plan laid out yet. And no, I'm not being dramatic for fun. I am being dramatic because the chaos is doing Packer. So yes, now we're still sitting here like, are we yet to see them go through another eviction moment? They still don't have housing yet. And the part that hits the hardest is how this is going to affect their kids. Oh, this is what we are going to get into. According to the receipts that this creator Ash Truffy shared, the very motel shelter that Stephanie and Drew together with their kids live in might be set for demolition. And the way she explained it made it feel like the whole situation has been a ticking clock this entire time. And they've been sitting there like the clock is a cute wall decoration. She explains that the Jenkins had lived in two motels so far that were of the same name, which is the Portland Value Inn, and are both owned by the same people. So not only are we dealing with motel life, we're dealing with a motel franchise situation. Same name, same owners, same storyline, same instability like besties. Pick a struggle. She explains that the former motel shelter the Resilient Jenkins had been living in that looked like double-story buildings already got demolished and were redeveloped into 5-story affordable housing. And I'm sorry, but that sentence alone is terrifying because it means this is not a maybe someday kind of thing. It already happened once. She went on narrating that over a year, she had researched and found that both motels were set to be demolished. And the first one was demolished at the end of 2024 and beginning of 2025. And so that former motel shelter is no longer a shelter. So we're not talking about rumor energy. We're talking about a real timeline, end of 2024, beginning of 2025. It's done. It's gone. It's not a shelter. She went on further narrating that for the current motel shelter for the Resilient Jenkins are living in, it hasn't yet gotten a word of it being yet to be demolished. At least not yet. And she showed screenshots that showed that it hadn't yet been listed for immediate demolition.
All right, so let's set this straight about the motel that the Resilient Jenkins are currently living in that is a shelter, okay? Now, over a year ago, before they were in this specific shelter, they were in another shelter by the same name, okay? Not gonna give the name, not gonna give the addresses, so the screenshots I'm gonna post are going to be solely of what exactly is going on with demolition, okay? Now, there are two motels of the same name. They're both owned by the same people. The first motel that the Resilient Jenkins were at, I think you guys may remember it. It was a double story. They kind of looked like apartments, kind of. Those motels were actually demolished already. They are moving in affordable housing for that area. So that's already done. Now, the research that I did over a year ago again slated both of those motels to be demolished. But that first motel was being demolished at the end of 2024, beginning of 2025. That's done. That's over with. Now, this motel has not yet got word that it will be demolished, and you will see some screenshots here on the screen. I also included a screenshot that they are, in fact, a shelter. They've been a shelter since early 2022 when they converted both of these motels into COVID shelters for the elderly, and then they became shelters for people that are less fortunate, with children, etc., etc. Now, back then, I called this motel. You can't rent any kind of motel here. Like, you can't buy or rent a night here. You have to have a voucher from the state that you can actually stay there with. Now, this motel, again, has not had a time to be demolished. Like I said, last year, they were slating it to follow. So that's what I was following, was the 2025, end of 2025, beginning of 2026 slate date. Now that I look at it, it doesn't look like that's there anymore. However, do I think they will get demolished? Absolutely, because they are just as bad as the original ones that got demolished. In this area, that the one that got demolished was in Southeast, the other one is in a different area, but in this area they are in need of affordable housing. So I do see the government actually tearing it down, but it is not official yet. So I hope clears everything up. At any time they can pull them out and say, hey, we're gonna get rid of this area and be done with it. And that's a chance you take when you live in a shelter.
But here's the part that makes your stomach drop because hasn't yet been listed for immediate demolition. It's not the same thing as safe forever. It's giving not today and they have kids. She went on to state that these motel were turned into motel shelters in early 2022 to COVID shelters for the elderly, then later became shelters for people that are less fortunate with children. So this isn't a regular motel situation where you just walk in, pay, get a key, and post a cute little room tour. It's a shelter system situation. She went on admitting to have called the motel shelter back then to find out that one can't buy or rent any motel there as one has to have a voucher from the state that one can be allowed to stay there. And the way that sentence changed the whole story because Stephanie and Drew are not paying any fees to stay in this motel like they had stated and used to make an excuse of where the money goes to. Now, besties, breathe with me because this is the part where the internet collectively does the math and the math starts screaming. This creator went on stating that last year this motel shelter had been slated for demolition early 2026 so as to follow the previous motel shelter that had already been demolished, but this was no longer showing. However, this doesn't guarantee that it won't soon get demolished since the previous one was turned into affordable housing in the southeast and the same need of affordable housing being in the area that Stephanie and her family live in. So it's very likely that this shelter too could be demolished at any moment to create this service in this area too. This means that they are living in a motel shelter they haven't been paying for over a year and yet are on a probability of being evicted as it had initial demolition plans. Can this get any worse? Now, since the creator had exposed that where Drew and Stephanie were living is a motel shelter that is not rented out or bought, meaning they live there for free, many questions arose because it was just not making sense because the two had mentioned that they pay rent weekly. And to that, Drew had even gone ahead to show receipts of this payment for the same motel, which kind of made the public believe that they are really paying to live in this motel. However much, many had the idea that it had been a motel shelter. So it was like the internet was split into two groups. One group was like, maybe it's a shelter. The other group was like, but he showed a receipt, and then the creator came in like, actually, let's look at the receipt. Well, this creator explained this in detail, saying that the fun fact about the receipt had been that the address on it hadn't been the main address of the motel shelter, as it was instead an address of the Great of New Hope Family Services Development Department that is across the street from the motel. So the receipt wasn't even screaming motel rent, it was whispering family services office. She went on explaining that during the time Drew had showed this receipt, it had been a time when there were government issues happening, which would be behind the reasons why he could have had this receipt, adding that it could have almost likely meant that they hadn't gotten their vouchers for that month and that family services decided to load it on a debit card or provided them the funds in order to pay for their week or month.
You're showing this receipt. So, a fun fact about that receipt is that's not even the hotel's main address. You know what address that is when I bring it up? I'll put it here on the screen. It's the Family Services Department that's across the street. During the time that this was done, that he showed a receipt, there was government stuff happening. There's a lot of reasons why he could have a receipt or why him and Steph can have a receipt. The long and short of it is basically most likely they didn't get their voucher for that month and that family services loaded it on a debit card or provided them the funds in order to pay for their week or month or however long they ask for funds at that shelter. Because those of you guys that don't know, when you're living in a shelter, you basically live off a voucher that is worth a certain amount of money, and then you are placed in one of these motels so you can provide the voucher to them. So the fact that they lied, like, are you all really surprised that they are lying that they're paying for a hotel? If you guys go on these websites and things, it directs you to call the motel. And when you call them, they tell you that there's no vacancies due to the fact that they are a shelter. And again, across the street from the shelter is a family services office, and that's what the address is on this receipt. There's numerous different reasons they had a debit receipt, including them loading just a debit card with the funds that are needed for them to live there. But they are not paying for where they are living, going on a year now.
She further explained that living in a shelter means living off a voucher that is worth a certain amount of money and then placed in one of the motel in order to provide the voucher to them. She went on emphasizing that if one called up this motel shelter, they would be informed about how there were no vacancies because they don't rent out but are a shelter. Adding that across the street from the shelter is a family services office, so it had been the address that was on the receipt Drew showed. Now, it was all making sense and adding up. Of course, they would have this receipt if the family services decided to load the voucher payment onto a debit card to pay for the shelter. So this takes us back to the part that these two people have been lying all this time. On top of refusing to get out of the motel that they have been claiming to pay for, it turns out they are not even paying for it at all. And they have lived in it for a year almost. Now, let me be very clear. Let me be very clear because I am not about to twist it. The issue is not about them being able to receive free housing. The issue is the fact that they haven't been using any money on paying up rent, yet have been playing in our faces saying that they spend $700 a week on the motel rent. And that was the reason why they wouldn't be able to keep money to put down for a bigger and stable house. So where has this money that they have been alleging to go into housing been going then? If they weren't paying for housing, these people really did play in our faces. Let us recall how the public tried to give Stephanie advice on getting an Airbnb that had more space and was bigger, because people were not even trying to be shady at first. They were genuinely like, okay, if you're saying the motel is eating your money every single week, wouldn't it make sense to put that same money into something that at least has space for the kids to breathe? And the number of people kept bringing up was $2,800 a month, which was less than the $30K they were spending on a month in a motel room. And not even a cute motel room either. We're talking miserable conditions, no space, no privacy, everybody stacked up on top of each other like luggage, and the kids are just supposed to live like that while the adults act like this is normal. So the public really wondered why she would continue to spend that much money on a motel room when the same amount could have got them a bigger house. Then Stephanie went on ahead to even screen record looking for the Airbnb. And at first you'd think, okay, maybe she's finally about to do something, but no. The screen recording turned into a whole performance of none of these are my preference. Like she's shopping for a luxury penthouse while living in a one room with 7 people. And the thing that had people's heads spinning is that even when she found one that was an affordable price, she still refused to apply for it, saying, too good to be true. And how she wasn't to put all her eggs in one basket, which was the dumbest reason ever she could give. Because besties, what basket? You already have all the eggs in the motel basket, and that basket doesn't even have space, and it's been a year. Like, you can't be scared of too good to be true when what you're living in right now is literally too bad to keep choosing. At some point, it stops sounding cautious and starts sounding like you just don't want to leave. And it did not stop at Airbnb suggestions either. Even for trailer parks that had been affordable, she had refused them, saying they did not have a drainage system, which was again an uninformed reasoning, since these trailer parks do have drainage systems. So it's just excuse after excuse, and it's always the kind of excuse that sounds like it was invented on the spot, just enough words to shut down the option, but not enough sense to actually explain anything. All these options were suitable for her to get as they fell in the range of money she had claimed to pay every week or a month for the motel, and many believe it wouldn't be hard to pay for them either. And yet they were far better options. So the question became less, can they afford it? And more, why are they refusing? Because after a while, besties, it starts feeling like the motel isn't the problem. It's the comfort of staying exactly where they are, even when it's clearly hurting the kids. Remember, even when they were looking for a co-signer, Drew had gone ahead to comment how the house they had wanted to get was coming at a lower price than the amount they were spending in the motel monthly. In this live, he had been begging for anyone to co-sign for them, saying that they hadn't they don't have enough money to make a forward payment for the house, and so they needed a co-signer to help them get the house. And that whole era was already messy because it's like you're begging strangers to co-sign, but you're also refusing other options that are right there. Now, with this new shelter information, it hits differently because if the motel wasn't even being paid the way they implied, then what exactly was the financial emergency? Basically, we have been following their housing updates and they have been saying that the issue has been money. However, now we know that the whole time they were not even paying rent. The whole time it has been a scam and they weren't losing $30K monthly on paying up rent. Yet, always brought this excuse up as a reason why they did not have enough money to get a better house. They really made a fool out of everyone with the receipt they showed and all the lies. Yet, all they wanted was to stay in the motel without having to pay a penny for their housing. No wonder even when people suggested cheaper housing for them, Stephanie turned it down, saying that they weren't to accept housing that the whole public knew location of. Meanwhile, even their motel is publicly known because of her posting it herself. But she somehow always had an excuse not to put her kids out of this motel. We always knew them for being big liars. But this hits harder because where were they putting this money then? If they weren't spending it on the motel at all. This is the biggest betrayal they have ever given to their children. The whole time they weren't even trying to get these kids out of homelessness, but we're finding all reasons to keep them in homelessness. Poor kids. Again, why it is very mind-blowing that the whole time they haven't been using the $3K to pay for the rent for a year now is because Stephanie has been making a handsome paycheck from her social media. She has her TikTok account and her Facebook account. The pay on TikTok might not be quite a lot, but her pay on Facebook has been the real deal given the number of followers she has on there and the engagement she gets on her page. One creator came out and mentioned that they had way less followers and views on their page than Stephanie and yet still made good sum of money, which she concluded only meant that Stephanie has an account of 99K followers, was making not less than $10K. And that's as of Facebook alone. Even TikTok may not pay her as much, but it still brings in a portion to add to her income from these platforms. And roughly it would be 14K minimum that she gets away with a month.
I never talk about the Jenkins, and I'm going to today just this one time, just because I want to say she's making a lot of money, okay? And the only reason I know she's making a lot of money is because she popped up on my Facebook. And I'm monetized on Facebook too. And I have less followers than her and less views, okay? And I'm not going to tell you how much I make, but I'm going to tell you, I know she's making at least 10 grand a month. At least 10 grand a month off of Facebook alone. Just alone. That's not including TikTok. TikTok's paying peanuts, so who cares? But it's still some money. So I know she's probably making like 14 grand a month, realistically. Like, that's a conservative number. And if you're making 14 grand a month, it is absolutely absurd to not be able to save any of that money for any sort of housing. Especially living in a motel. I'm telling you right now, she could easily save up within like 3 months and go get an RV. Like, I just don't understand. And that's why I'm saying she's on drugs. Because there's no way you can blow through that much money without just spending it on drugs. I mean, someone has been seeing her do her like little TikTok shop reviews, and they totaled up all the cost of all the little things that she got, and it was like over $1,200. I think it's just annoying for me to see children struggling, living in poverty, knowing how much money people make on social media, because I am monetized. And so I know how much money she's making. And I've kept quiet about it because I'm not a pocket watcher, but I am someone who wants to look out for those children. And I'm telling you, she's making at least $10,000 to $14,000 a month. And that's a conservative number. And just know all that money is going towards drugs. And as an ex-drug addict, look, takes one to know one. I know what I'm looking at, okay? That lady's on drugs.
Now, we even know that none of this was being used on paying the motel. She also receives food stamps monthly and even sends Drew to the food pantry. They pay no bills at all from this money. No wonder she bragged once about making more money than most that have 9 to 5 jobs. She knew she makes more, but her statement lost meaning since she is the one in a motel room while other people have their own homes. She knew she makes more and just uses it extravagantly and intentionally because she doesn't care. So how come they are still in this motel and claim they are trying their best to get housing? How does that even make the slightest sense? They have the money and are still choosing to live in this motel with their kids, depriving their kids of any sense of privacy or space. Stephanie likes to play as a struggling mother, but she is none of these things. She has the money and chooses to garden at it away with her man. This is the only way to explain where the ton of money she earns goes to when they are literally paying for nothing. We have seen them instead buying expensive food while they feed the kids slop. We have seen Stephanie spending money on TikTok shop items, but none of this is put aside for housing. It gets worse when we recall how Drew mentioned at the end of last year that it was going to take them another 8 months for them to fix their credit card and be able to get a house. Meanwhile, they spent a whole year earning money and not caring about fixing their credit or finding a home. Rather, went on to get comfortable in the motel and buying a new air fryer, a new TV, a gaming station, and so on. And then gardening every single day. Most of their money is spent on gardening. Drew even admitted to this when he mentioned they were to cut down the money spent on gardening by doing it only once a week. This is evidence of where their money goes. But do they stop to think about how this affects their children? Do they ever think of how this motel living has a major mental toll on their children? Seems like they don't care, because if they did, they wouldn't be doing this to them. This gets even crazier when we recall the crash outs that Stephanie has been having about housing. For example, at the time that they were looking for a co-signer, Stephanie shamelessly attacked the property manager for not working on them earlier and for telling them to find a co-signer in a limited time frame, knowing very well that the money she earns was even enough to have made the forward payments required to avoid the need for a co-signer. Makes Stephanie look pretty much insane. She went ahead and called out a person that had only been doing her job because she wasn't qualified for housing. Yet, she even had the potential to pay up given the money she gets. She felt entitled to getting a house that she wasn't even willing to pay for. What a joke. Also, recently, she had made a post complaining about how dissatisfied she had been because the homestead that she had worked to purchase had been taken by another family that happened to pay for it. She felt bad about it being taken, saying she could have used the land well. But even then, she knew she could have been capable of using her money and saving it up for the homestead, and yet still decided to blow it all away. Pat was feeling bad because the family that had their priorities straight and paid off the house took it. So basically, she stands there without doing anything and thinks a home will magically get given to her without her efforts, without her doing anything to achieve it. She constantly talks of her dream home, how she wants it with at least 2 bathrooms, how she wants a bigger kitchen with more appliances to use, how she wants a laundry room with a washer and a dryer. She makes all these fantasies and yet isn't in the very least working towards achieving them all. She thinks she deserves all these things for free while she wastes her money on her own things. Isn't this time next level kind of entitlement? Now, this all takes us back to the fact that they had money all that time and failed to get a home, or maybe save it for a home for in case. Now, this motel shelter that they are so much comfortable in can anytime be demolished and they can be evicted any random time. How are they to handle it with no plans of getting a home or anything? The last time they were evicted, they were given a month to prepare for the eviction. A month to prepare for eviction, and had already known even months before that they would be evicted since they had known they hadn't been paying rent. However, they only started looking for places to stay at the very last minute, calling out housing opportunities for not paying attention to them, as if it had been their fault, to send in applications just days to the eviction. And because of how relaxed they had been the whole time, instead of looking for housing, they ended up in a motel. It's now a whole year. They are yet again comfortable even when there are plans of the demolition of this hotel. Where will they take their kids this time? In another motel? Are they really willing to put their kids through another eviction situation? Because by the looks of it, it will be one morning when these innocent kids wake up and they are being sent away from the motel they have been in, only to relocate to God knows where. Maybe an even worse motel room. These kids don't deserve this kind of unstable living for their childhood memories. They really do not. They do deserve better. But how will they even get better when their parents don't even know what better means? How will they get this better situation when their mother would rather spend all their money on gardening than stay in the and stay in a motel, these kids will feel so betrayed and let down once they grow up and realize that all the suffering they went through wasn't because their parents were struggling to go back, but because their parents chose their own pleasures over their children's happiness. The truth will sadly break their souls on top of the trauma itself that they have been put through, having no sense of stability or safety at all times. So now we're at the part where the jokes stop being cute, because if this motel shelter really does get demolished, what are they actually doing? Because the scary part isn't, oh, they have to move. The scary part is they've been living like this for almost a year, getting comfortable, acting like this room is permanent, and still not having a real plan sitting on the table. And then what do they just bounce into? Another shelter like it's a loyalty program? Or do they finally get an apartment? Or do they end up in a paid for motel pretending it's progress? Or are they going to end up basically homeless on the streets because they blew up all their money and left none for moments exactly like this? Because it's giving, we'll deal with it when it happens. And that mindset is cute when it's a lead bill, not when it's your kids' stability.